And suddenly everything looks different here again. I told you weeks ago the tariffs are significantly too high. No one from Germany will pay $3,500 for an iPhone. How does it look today? Completely different. We have received significantly more positive news again. We will talk about that and other important things right away. But first, I want you to like this video and comment so that the video reaches as many people as possible, especially in these difficult times. I'm all the more reliant on your support. And as I said, I already announced weeks ago the tariffs are too high. Then last night came the news from Donald Trump that he is now suspending all tariffs for 90 days. And you have to imagine, the tariffs haven't even come into effect yet. That means it was all just talk, all just hot air. All the tariffs are now paused for 90 days, except for the tariffs with China. There, the tariffs were even increased. And it's just quite clear what's happening here. In the end, it's obviously somewhere market manipulation, but it was completely clear. At least it was clear to me, and I showed you that in the last videos. The tariffs were so high, the USA could never have sustained them for weeks. Nevertheless, this is already very positive. After this news, we had the second largest gain on the daily view yesterday. Over $3.5 trillion were flushed back into the stock markets yesterday. The mood changed overnight, drastically changed. We have also seen a nice rise in Bitcoin and Ethereum, and it just looks completely different than it did a few days ago. Now, of course, the question is, how will it continue? Because fundamentally, we are still standing quite bullish. We have not broken through our important support zone. If we had broken through it, it would have definitely been tough, but we did not break through, which is extremely important. We also saw certain large zones where there is simply too much capital. On one hand, we had a lot of buyers in Bitcoin, especially spot buyers who have accumulated significantly in certain zones, particularly in the region of $74,000 per Bitcoin, where there was really aggressive buying, at least as far as the spot position is concerned. And accordingly, we have now seen a strong sell-off, and we have seen a lot of capital in the markets again. Now, of course, it depends on how things will continue. I can also imagine that we might correct again, or something like that. I don't think we will go straight to 100,000, but the macro situation has significantly improved, because yesterday we still had a probability of recession. From 66%, today only 50%. And that's just because all the tariffs are now paused for 90 days. Accordingly, the probability of recession has significantly decreased overnight, and the markets have immediately experienced an upswing. Goldman Sachs, one of the largest US banks, recently published a report stating, "Yo, we will probably go into a recession," and so on. This was immediately retracted yesterday after the tariff announcement. And there you can simply see how manipulated the whole thing is. Banks talk about recessions, incite panic, and so on. Then a good piece of news comes in that the tariffs don't look as bad, and suddenly, supposedly, we're not heading into a recession. That's how manipulated the whole thing is, and you should be aware of it. I, from a technical chart perspective, saw that things didn't look good over the last few days. But what's good is that we fought our way back above this 200-day moving average, which is currently at $76,000. It would definitely have been tough if we had lost this support zone, because it is truly a long-term support zone. You can see it here as well. If we had lost it sustainably, then I tell you, we would have next targeted the price levels of $50,000 or $45,000 per Bitcoin. And at the latest there, we probably would have encountered resistance again. But it would have been tough if we had lost this support. Because, you can see it yourself, if we once sustainably lose the support here, we usually also drop below the 50-day moving average. Currently, the 50-day moving average is at $45,000. And I believe none of us wants to see these price levels here with Bitcoin. Accordingly, everything is still in the green zone here, as long as we definitely hold this support zone. In the last cycle, we also had a really massive correction here, but we also held this important resistance zone, and accordingly, we were able to experience another huge upward trend afterwards. Everything still looks good so far. It's good that we have held certain zones. Of course, it depends on how things proceed from here. But on a macro level, several things improved significantly very quickly yesterday. And I had already shown you this weeks ago. We had already seen tariffs from Donald Trump, and even then, the markets initially went down briefly. But after a few weeks, we simply continued to see an upward trend here as well, despite tariffs against China. Therefore, in the long term, not much changes, and in the long term, we also see that these tariffs, which were announced a few weeks ago, cannot possibly be implemented because they are simply too harsh. That's why I believe, whether we have tariffs or not, we will still be able to rise reasonably in the coming months, because, it was exactly the same before. Everything didn't look good. And yet, after a few weeks or months, we were continuously rising again. But yesterday, another piece of news came out. Trump has asked if he can dismiss Jerome Powell, and this request has not yet been approved, but you can clearly see the direction this is heading. Trump wants to have Jerome Powell and other people from the Fed dismissed. He probably also wants to place a few of his own people there who would be more likely to cooperate with him, because currently, as we've seen, the Fed and Trump are not harmonizing well. I mean, Jerome Powell has done some things that Trump didn't like. You could see that in Trump's tweets and so on. Trump himself says, the whole time, Jerome Powell hesitates too long and this and that. It definitely remains exciting, but it could also become very interesting in terms of monetary policy if we have someone else there who might act better for the markets. And yesterday it was also confirmed that Paul Atkins is now officially working for the SEC. He is now the chairman of the SEC, and that is very good because he is pro-Bitcoin, pro-crypto. Back then, the SEC was only putting obstacles in our way all the time. That is now coming to an end. Now we have significantly better, more positive people there. Also, something that is very, very positive. And as I just showed you, the only tariffs still in place are against China. But here too, Trump has already announced that they might find an agreement. That would be really good for the markets because then we would have this complete uncertainty removed. Because currently some are still factoring in the tariffs and the uncertainty is simply not completely gone yet. However, it is very positive, and I also showed you the playbook recently. We are now seeing that China also has to play a different card. China has already announced interest rate cuts. As a result, we naturally get credit easing and further fiscal measures. This is very good for us in the long term. This way, we get long-term liquidity into the markets. Capital flows are shifting, risk assets are getting a tailwind, and the world simply feels more liquidity. This is what we are currently slowly seeing from China. It would of course be nice if they could finally come to an agreement with Trump. And if we no longer had tariffs around the world, I think something like that could be negotiated in the coming weeks. But I don't think it will be that easy between these two parties, and I don't want to paint everything in a positive light today. But we also see from a technical analysis perspective that we have had such drastic capitulations every time. Also before the bull run in 2021, where Ethereum performed really impressively, we experienced a strong correction with Ethereum and broke through the actual Ethereum realized price downwards. When we did that, we had a breakout again quite quickly, and as a result, we even rose significantly stronger. That was before this massive bull run in 2021. Again, we broke through the Ethereum realized price. And I think it would be worth speculating that we will see a very quick recovery here again. Because in the last few weeks, one thing became very clear once again. The retail investors sold their holdings while the smart money, the whales, aggressively invested in Bitcoin. They don't do this for no reason. They obviously know how the game works, and they realized a few days ago that Bitcoin is significantly undervalued and only the small investors sold in panic here. Very interesting and very important to understand how the whole thing works here. At this point, I hope you enjoyed it so far. It was a lot of work, so please support me with a like and a comment. And with that, I would say, see you next time, friends. Bye.